Dark chocolate ice cream. If you like chocolate, you'll love this delicious, creamy, rich tasting ice cream alternative made with coconut milk instead of cream. Using dark chocolate instead of cocoa powder gives it a silky smooth texture and more depth of flavor. And you'll find that even people who don't normally like coconut often like this flavor because the coconut flavor is subdued by the chocolate. Here's what you need for the recipe. You need 1/3 cup of plain unfiltered water, 2 teaspoons of unflavored gelatin. If you're cooking for a vegetarian or a vegan, make sure to use agar-agar powder, and you'll use only 3/4 of a teaspoon of agar-agar powder, which is the vegetarian equivalent of gelatin. You'll need 1/4 cup of honey. I like to use a honey from my state or region, and a lighter colored honey will have a more mild flavor than a dark honey. Make sure to have at least another 1 to 3 tablespoons of honey on the side in case you want a sweeter taste. You'll need 4 ounces of bittersweet dark chocolate. Now, if you're cooking for someone who has celiac disease or even a mild gluten intolerance, make sure to read labels carefully so you can check to see that the chocolate wasn't made on equipment shared with wheat. There are a lot of brands of dark chocolate to choose from. What you want for this recipe is a dark chocolate with at least 70 to 72% cocoa content. The higher the cocoa content, the lower the sugar content, and the more antioxidants. You'll also need 1 or 2 teaspoons of pure vanilla extract or alcohol-free vanilla flavoring. You'll need 1/8 to 1/4 teaspoon of finely ground unrefined sea salt. It will enhance the flavor of other ingredients. You'll also need 1/4 to 1/2 teaspoon of pure stevia extract powder. Read labels carefully because many brands of stevia have added starches and other fillers. So again, pure stevia extract powder with nothing added, or a clear stevia extract liquid. Measure carefully because it's 100 to 300 times sweeter than sugar, and if you use too much, you'll have a bitter aftertaste. An optional ingredient to have on hand is 2 tablespoons of rum. You can use coconut rum, which we'll do today, or just a regular rum, again from a supermarket or a liquor store. You might be wondering why add alcohol to your frozen desserts. The reason is that alcohol acts like an antifreeze, so it keeps the frozen dessert from freezing hard and icing up. So when you put that in the machine with the mixture, what happens is your frozen dessert freezes a little bit lighter and a little bit softer, so you don't have to let it sit out at room temperature for as long if you're pulling it out of the freezer. You'll need 3 cups of light coconut milk or 1.5 cups of full-fat coconut milk blended with water. I usually buy the full-fat coconut milk. I figure why pay the same price for regular and light? So I take the coconut milk from the can, blend it till it's smooth, and then I mix 1.5 cups of this coconut milk with 1.5 cups of water to give me 3 cups of light. The next step is to start assembling the ingredients. Here's what you do. Pour the water into a saucepan and sprinkle slowly with gelatin. It's important that you add the gelatin very slowly. Don't dump it in all at once. You need to give it time to soak up the water. You can use a wide saucepan like I have here or a more narrow saucepan, but again, make sure to sprinkle slowly. We'll let this sit for a few minutes to soften. You'll be able to tell when it's softened because the gelatin will have disappeared into the water and you won't see white spots. While we're waiting, let's get some of the coconut milk into another saucepan and make it ready for the chocolate. Add 1 cup to 1.5 cups of your coconut milk to a saucepan. Bring to boil. Once the mixture comes to boil, what I'll do is add the chocolate, and that will help it to melt quickly without burning. It's important to chop the chocolate into small pieces or break it into small pieces so that it melts very quickly and easily. Once the gelatin is softened, we can turn on the pot and bring it to a very low boil to dissolve the gelatin or the agar-agar completely, like this. Once the gelatin mixture comes to boil, you can turn the heat down, but be sure to wait to stir until after it's completely dissolved and clear. After the gelatin mixture has simmered for a few minutes and it looks clear, you can turn it off. Once the coconut milk comes to a full rolling boil, you can remove it from the heat, turn it off, add the chocolate, and then stir to melt. Now we're ready to add the honey and the sea salt. Give it a stir. Now we're ready to combine all the ingredients. Make sure when you're adding the gelatin mixture to the blender that you scrape the bottom of the pan completely to get all of the gelatin out of the bottom of the pot, like so. Make sure to use a heat-proof spatula. Next step is to add our warm chocolate mixture. Now, we'll add our coconut milk that's reserved, our vanilla, and our stevia. Start with half the amount of stevia, then you can blend, taste, and adjust as needed. The next step is to blend. What I'm going to do first is clear away some of the things that I don't need. It's really essential whenever you're cooking, if you have a lot of things on the counter, that you keep clearing them out of the way so you have plenty of workspace and you're less likely to spill, drop, or break anything. Now we're ready to blend the ingredients. I started the blender on low and then slowly raised it to a higher setting. That's really important so it doesn't shoot up through the top of the blender. I'm going to taste it and then adjust the seasonings if needed. Since the chocolate is really dark, you might find that you need to add a little bit more honey or the additional quarter teaspoon of reserved stevia. So if you're adding more honey, add it a tablespoon at a time, or if you only used a quarter teaspoon of stevia at the beginning, make sure to add another eighth to a quarter teaspoon of stevia, then blend, taste, and adjust as needed. I think it's just right. Now we'll add our rum and blend again. The next step is to pour the mixture into jars and cover and chill. I like to use wide-mouth canning jars. It's easy to get the contents in and take them out. I use a wide-mouth funnel like this. You'll have a little bit of overflow that you'll need to pour into a second jar. Once you have this liquid in the jar, it's a good idea to label the jars to remind you that you have 2 jars and what you have in here, making them ready for making the dessert. The next step is to place these in the refrigerator and chill them for 6 to 8 hours or overnight. You want the mixture to thicken up to a soft jello-like texture. That's going to give it the best texture when it goes into the machine. Remember, we don't have the whipping qualities of cream or of eggs to give it a light, fluffy texture, and this will prevent it from getting icy and hard in the freezer. An alternative, if you'd like to churn it more quickly, is to make an ice bath. So for your ice bath, what you need to do is fill a bowl halfway with ice. Add water to cover. Take a smaller bowl and pour your ice stream mixture into the bowl. Place it inside the larger bowl and then stir with a large spoon or whisk. It will take 20 or 30 minutes for it to chill and start to congeal, but it's really important that the mixture is cold when it goes into the machine. Otherwise, it will melt the canister before your ice cream or ice stream has a chance to freeze. Again, I usually prefer to just make the mixture a day or two ahead, chill it in the refrigerator because it's less work than an ice bath, but you can do it either way. So what we'll do is put this in the refrigerator and then we'll come back with the chilled mixture and we'll start churning. The chocolate ice stream has been sitting in the refrigerator overnight, so now it's super thick and ready to churn. You'll find that it has a thick, almost pudding-like consistency after chilling in the refrigerator, and that's from the gelatin or the agar-agar powder. Now we're ready to assemble the machine and start it churning. Shake your frozen canister. Make sure that it's frozen solid. If you hear any liquid sloshing around, you need to put it back in a plastic bag and into the freezer for at least 24 hours. And if you want to make more than one flavor on the same day, you'll need to have 2 canisters so that after the first one has been used, you can pull out a second canister and make another flavor. Otherwise, you'll have to make them each about a day apart to allow the canister time to refreeze. The next step is to place the dasher in the container and then add the lid and lock it in place. Now, what we're going to do is scrape the mixture, the chilled ice stream base or batter, whichever you want to call it, into the machine. But it's essential that the machine is running before you add it. Otherwise, the mixture can freeze to the side of the canister before the dasher has a chance to move. So once we get it churning, we'll let it go for 20 to 30 minutes. Set a timer for 20 minutes and stay close. You'll know it's done because the mixture will be thick and fluffy and voluminous, and the machine will sound like it's laboring when it's really fluffy. And at that point, you'll need to make sure to turn it off. We'll come back in 20 minutes and check to see how it's doing. The chocolate ice stream is done churning, so it's ready to serve or spoon into containers and store in the freezer. Let's lift out the dasher and scrape off this delicious, creamy chocolate ice stream. This one froze a little bit softer than the vanilla ice stream because we added rum. You don't absolutely need it, but it definitely makes a big difference. Now, we'll scoop it into the containers. If possible, use cardboard containers rather than plastic, or use wide-mouth glass jars. If you use glass jars rather than cardboard containers, be sure to leave an inch of space below the lip in the jar to allow the mixture room to expand when it freezes. I'm freezing it in pint containers so that they'll be used up more quickly than if I put it in a large container that would be altered in flavor and texture by repeated freezing and thawing. Homemade frozen desserts do freeze harder than store-bought varieties. Don't be alarmed if after you store this in the freezer for 24 to 48 hours, if the mixture is very hard. All you need to do is allow it to sit at room temperature for about 15 minutes before serving until it's soft enough to scoop. If you've added rum or other liqueur to the mixture, sometimes you can reduce that time to 10 minutes, or you may not need to let it sit out at all. It may be ready to scoop. We'll put the lids on, place them in the freezer, and then they can be served later. That's all there is to it. You'll wash the canister, Just rinse it out with warm water, dry it, wrap it in a plastic bag, and put it back in the freezer, making it ready for churning another batch another day.